We are super excited to be here. I think this is falling down.
Oh,
There we go. All right. We had to find a very good spot in my office for us to meet today, but we have a special guest. We have Rachel Larson joining us today, and today is the first Sexy First Friday of the year. I cannot believe that it is already January 5th. Today we are going to be talking about the Enneagram, relationships, and therapy. Both Rachel and I are licensed marriage and family therapists who use the Enneagram in our practice, and we are desperately missing Sam today as well. It feels kind of weird to not have her, but I'm also really excited to be bringing someone different to you today that can give us a little bit different perspective as well. So I thought what we would do is just start to introduce ourselves again. Many of you know who I am already, but I will go quickly through who I am and what my Enneagram type is, and then we'll have Rachel share a little bit about who she is and her Enneagram type as well. So my name is Lindsay Frazier. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified sex therapist, an IA-accredited professional. I have a private practice in South Minneapolis where I specialize in relationships and sexuality utilizing the Enneagram. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Rachel?
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Larson, and as Lindsay said, I'm also a marriage and family therapist, also in the Twin Cities area. I see clients here in South Minneapolis as well as in the North Metro, a little bit north of northern suburbs area. I also specialize in couples and do a lot of work with the Enneagram in my practice as well. I'm also trained in EMDR and utilize that in therapy too.
Oh, and we forgot to, I always do this, but
Yeah.
I forget to share my Enneagram
Oh,
type.
yeah.
So I am a 9 with a wing of 1, and I have social in the dominant position, and I have the sexual instinct in the repressed position. And I think what's interesting is we have a heart type today with us.
Yes.
So why don't you go ahead and share your Enneagram type as well?
Yes, I am a type 2, and I am, I'm going to say wing 3. I feel like my wings are pretty balanced. It's hard for me to identify sometimes. And then sexual dominant and social repressed.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey into using the Enneagram in your practice, Rachel? I'd love to hear a little bit more about like how you were introduced, what made you decide it was something you wanted to use in therapy, and just a little bit of that story.
Sure. Yeah, well, mine actually goes back to my own therapist back probably in 2015 or so. I think around then. And she just asked if I knew this thing, the Enneagram, and she was talking about numbers, and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so that was my first little, I guess, step into like, what is this thing? The first time I'd heard the word Enneagram. From there, I didn't really do too much with it at that point. Fast forward a few years later, and I went through a divorce and then started dating someone new, and like during that whole transition I really found myself kind of reflecting back on my marriage relationship. In the meantime, I had gotten a little bit more into the Enneagram, knew like his type, my type, like some of those things. So I was reflecting a lot, and then being in the new relationship and kind of that pairing and really trying to like discern some things around like what was, I don't know, we can talk more about that later if you want, but that's kind of where I was like, ooh, this is super helpful, like from a relational standpoint, to understand both myself and like how I'm showing up in my relationship as well as him, and the way, the things that he was doing or the way he was showing up, and like making sense of just some of those differences. And so I think for me, that personal application is part of where I got really excited about the idea of integrating that in, especially with my work with couples. And so that's really where that jumped off for me. Yeah.
Well, and I think as the title is today is talking about relationships, the Enneagram, and in therapy. And so one of the things that I thought that we would talk a little bit today about is like why each of us have decided or have moved to using the Enneagram in our practice. Both of us started our practices where the Enneagram wasn't part of it. So we want to share a little bit about sort of how that shift happened and sort of like what we saw shift and occur in the work that we were doing. But I will talk a little bit about sort of like what brought me to it as well. I know that we've talked about this before, probably in previous episodes, but I was introduced to the Enneagram probably about 10 years ago now by Leslie Root, who is actually going to be our guest next month, and Brooke Schmidt. And very similar to her, like I would meet these women for lunch every month, and they were talking about numbers, and I didn't have an idea or a clue of what it was. And interestingly enough, for me, I didn't ask as a 9 until I was like, you guys have been talking about this for like 3 months. Maybe I should ask what you're talking about. Because I would just like nod along, but I had no idea. And so what I think was huge for me, what I saw as far as the shift and like why I have been using it, is that once I started bringing it in, I would see much huger shifts with clients in my practice. And this is why I think it is so helpful to have a therapist that has this knowledge and this ability to bring it in, and also about how I would approach the therapy, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I would be curious, sort of like what made you want to bring it into your practice, Rachel?
Yeah. Yep. So kind of picking up where I left off with just the why of like with seeing it in my own relationship and then starting to bring that in into therapy. At that time, I would say I had a like basic-ish knowledge and like knew more about certain numbers than the others, because that's where I was focusing my attention, was on my own number and like his number and my ex's number and all those kinds of things. But just sort of like dipping my toe in some of those things and like asking questions, and it just, similar to you, like just that feeling of like, oh wow, like it just we could get at the heart of something a lot faster, or like I would say something and kind of like as a like I wonder, and then the person is like, oh my gosh, it's like, who I am, like what, like that kind of stuff. And so I think like rapport building right away, like that sense of like, oh, you get it. I think like that feels really good, like from a clinician side, especially as a 2, of course, like connecting, but to have that response and like build from that. And then I think like a lot of it, just the helping people to really get outside of like what am I trying to say? Like if they have a partner who it's like they take it very personally, like whatever that thing is, like, and like thinking about it from an Enneagram perspective and being able to like almost use that as a way of like externalizing it a little bit, to pull back and go like, what if that's not actually like something they're trying to do to bug you, like, or like, like, and like being able to use it to really understand each other better, versus feeling the like, I don't get, like, why don't you do it this way, and like some of those hangups that people often have. I don't know if you have seen that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially with, you and I both do like couples therapy and a lot of relational therapy. So not only is knowing your Enneagram type essential to sort of your own individual work, but like how impactful it actually has been in couples work. Yes. And one of the things that I see in couples work is like very similar to what you said. Like, like we think that everybody experiences the world the same way that we do. And what the Enneagram really had brought in is this ability to say like, well, wait a minute, actually there's 9 different ways to interpret and see the world. And if you add in instinctual stacking and wings, there's even a lot more, right, that kind of happen and occur. And so what I found with couples therapy, and why I think this is so helpful, is it creates that generosity for each other, right? Mm-hmm. Like even in my own relationship dynamic where I'm a 9 and my partner is a 5, like we're both withdrawal types. And so the advice that I'm going to give to like a 9-5 relationship dynamic is going to be really different than what I'm going to give to like 2 assertive types, right? Mm-hmm. So like we have a tendency, like we have to be really intentional about connection. We do walks every single night because we can just go and like do our own things and be happy. And where some people might say like you need space or you need to take time for yourselves, it's like, well, yes, we need that, but like in this particular pairing, maybe not as much as we'd like to keep the connection and the bonding going. And so it creates that generosity and that understanding. And I think for me as well, like what advice or way am I going to lead you in therapy because I know this? What things have you noticed similar to that as well, sort of in your work?
Yeah, that's really good thoughts. I think to your point, like really taking into account if we know someone's Enneagram type, because of course there are definitely people I see who don't know what the Enneagram is, and I haven't, dipped our toe into that to like explore that yet. But yes, if I know someone's type, or even if I have a suspicion about like maybe they might be, for example, like a head type, or like more general, or like an assertive type, or a withdrawal, whatever. I think maybe an example I could give is like with the type 4, for example, 4s being a lot more kind of in their feelings and in their emotional experiences, and their attention being so drawn. I might not, for example, give that person homework to like spend a lot of time journaling. I might give them more homework that might get them more in touch with their body, and more in touch with the more rational part of their brain. And so like it just as a little example of that, of like where for many people, like I think that would be a pretty common like homework thing that a therapist would give, would be like, oh, like why don't you spend some time really like thinking about and like letting yourself feel whatever you're feeling, and like get it down on paper, and like give yourself a minute to like be in your emotion. I would probably not give that same directive to type 4, because they need to maybe get a little bit more out of their emotions sometimes. So
yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying there, Rachel, because a lot of like what we do as Enneagram informed therapists is the homework, the things that we're doing for you to have more awareness and insight. Like very interesting, like when you're talking about that, like I'm not going to tell an 8 to be more assertive.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they actually need to be able to like sit back and be softer, and sometimes let other people run the show. And so I think the tool that it gives us as therapists, and if you're seeing a therapist that uses this tool, is it gives us insight into like really what's going to help you get out of those fixated states and make the most movement to your authentic self, and not let sort of like just those automatic things run. And so like to me, it really helps me know like when the client comes into my office, like what theory, approach, or homework is this person going to need the most, and also what are they going to need from me to get bought into the actual therapy process as well. Yeah.
Yes, I remember like in prep for this, Lindsay, you bringing up how you might work with like a 9, for example, and like what the expectation might be around that versus another number, with how the therapeutic, how fast or slow like the rapport building might go, and some of those kinds of things as well.
I'm a 9, and I know all your 9's games, by the way, because I've played them all, but it is a very interesting dynamic with 9's in particular in therapy, because they want to like please the therapist. And I think what I was telling you, and we're going to move into this here in a minute too, is just like how we show up as our types in therapy as therapists. But I remember like a previous therapy experience where like the therapist was giving me advice, and I was like, there is no way I'm going to do what you're telling me. And I smiled and I said, yep, I'll do that. And in my head I'm like, not going to happen, not going to happen. Because I think it's interesting. We think of 9's as very accommodating, but like what I was telling you is like, we really are not. We are very stubborn. We are not going to do a thing we don't want to do, but we are going to be more silent about it and hidden about it. And I know this particular thing about 9's, and so when they're in my office, I know when they're doing that, and I know when to call them out.
Yes.
And they don't always like it, but we get more of the therapeutic work done that we need to.
Which is what people are actually wanting and paying for.
Exactly.
We're not paying to be told everything that we want to hear. So
yeah, that's not exactly what therapy is. I mean, one of the interesting things about like therapy, if you haven't done therapy, or if you have, is it's like things always get a little worse before they get better. It's been one of the things as a therapist that I have really disliked having to tell people, because it does just get, thank you, Misty, because it's like, to have the lives and the things that we want, we have to examine ourselves in ways that are really scary, and it gets a little worse before it gets better. And with Enneagram type, I have to like shine the light on some of those fixated states that you have as well.
Well, that's where the growth happens. Yeah. I wish it was different, but it's not.
It's not.
You know, it was funny when you said that about being like sneaky, like you knowing the games and whatever. I was thinking about how like even if people don't know their Enneagram type, how we as therapists can like kind of pick up on some things. Again, like not that we're typing people or any of that kind of thing, but just having sort of a like, I wonder if it might be this kind of in the back of our minds, and then how we can even shift to what we're how we're doing homework or what we're, you know, like that whole thing. Even without the client actually knowing anything about the Enneagram, which is another kind of a neat thing about being an Enneagram focused therapist, and how we can still do really good and like make a lot of progress and do the work that we're doing, sort of behind the scenes, almost like sneaky, you know, like, ooh, we know maybe this thing over here and we're going to use that to like help guide the work that we're doing with the client.
Why don't you talk a little bit about like how you show up as a 2 as the therapist in the therapy office? I'm really curious about what that looks like. And you mentioned that when we were getting prepared for this. Like, I hadn't really thought about that before. Like, how do I show up as a 9? How do you show up as a 2? And I can, I can even talk a little bit to some other types that I know how they show up.
Yeah. Well, so that question even came to my mind because of the Enneagram training program that I went through to like do my certification. And they, as part of that, they have like a supervision thing with that. And so that was one of the questions that I was asked as I was doing some typing interviews, and they would watch those back and notice things. And so it was a really helpful process. Anyway, one of the things that I noticed and my coach drew my attention to was being too helpful. So not giving enough space for people to just kind of being quiet and like letting people arrive at an answer for something without like giving them too many handholds. And so that was like, oh, I didn't even know that I was doing that, because of course, to your point, like our fixations and our like what's not conscious to us, it really was like him seeing that in that video, me having to really think about it and see it and go, okay, yes, I can see that that is a tendency that I have. And so almost that idea of like trusting that my client is going to arrive at whatever their answer is, versus me giving like, well, it might be this or it might be that, or like, I don't know, what do you think? And kind of almost giving them breadcrumbs to like help them along. And so that's something that I've had to be really conscious of not doing. And, you know, like any human, like I can slip into that still sometimes, but that was a really helpful thing for me to just be aware of as just my type. And then a second one that we talked about just a little bit was the idea of, I think, well, I shouldn't say, I know a lot of therapists have their specific ways of doing things, and that's great. And I would say mine, I am who I am, but also like I'm kind of eclectic, or I'll pull different things. But I think as part of that, and being an image type, I can really sort of like lean into different parts of myself to build rapport with a particular client, or to change kind of what that client might need in the session. And so, for example, like if I had a type 8, which I think you might talk about in a second too, but if I were to have a type 8, my general way of being as a therapist is a little bit more curious and open and gentle and that sort of thing. And I'm still those things, but if I'm with more of an 8 energy person who I know wants to like kind of meet here, right? And like they want to kind of have that, I'll be more direct, or I'll kind of like pull into that part of myself that's a little, could be maybe a little sarcastic, or could be a little bit like tongue-in-cheek, or like direct, and pointing something out, or assertive, kind of meeting their energy. So we were talking about that, of like that morphing, and it still feels like I'm being authentically myself. It's more like I'm sort of modulating which aspect of me I'm sort of drawing into in order to connect with whoever it is that's in front of me. If it's a head type, it might be kind of being more more cerebral at first to kind of help to build some of that relationship and get their buy-in, or like help them to build trust with me that like I know what I'm talking about, or like building more of that like, okay, she, you know, she's done her research, or like whatever that is. So those kinds of things.
Yeah, it was interesting because like as you were talking, I found like, oh, aha, here's some of the things that I do as a 9 that I was not mentioning before when we were meeting.
Yeah.
I used to be afraid initially in the beginning when I would get the really loud and boisterous, angry client, wanting the environment to be calm, sort of trying to do whatever I could to smooth things over. That has shifted over time. But one of the things that I do realize I still do sometimes, I might let the assertive types dominate a little more than I'd like to, because I, don't want to interrupt, which is really funny because that's like my own stuff, right? And as a therapist, my job is to interrupt. But it was really interesting when you said it, I was like, oh, like I do that sometimes, right? And I have to remind myself that it is my job to basically be the initiator of the structure and of how things are moving and going. And so when I fall into more of my own fixated states as a therapist, I might let some of the more assertive types sort of dominate the therapy sessions and not interrupt them when it's necessary. Something I actually am significantly better at in therapy is being assertive and directive in the ways that I need to be, even now today, than I am in some aspects of my personal life. But one of the interesting things too, like when you talk about like how you like kind of like mold a little bit to sort of the client in your office, I don't do that, but I do adjust my therapy based on the person that is in my office. So like I know that, for instance, like 9s need a little bit more of a slower process. It's a lot of rapport building. It's a lot of like feeling seen and heard. And that therapy with 9s in particular typically is just slower. And I've had counterparts sometimes say, why are you not hurrying things up? Why are you not moving? My 8s. anyway, that I should be moving faster in therapy, right, than I am. And I noticed that with 8s in particular, like I will challenge them immediately and instantaneously. They like it. That builds the rapport with them. And I know that I'm talking to a lot of this is actually my social dominant stuff too as well, sort of like wanting to tend to and care to the relationships with the clients that I have in my office. And so there just is like, and I know that when I have like 6s or 1s, right, like they're going to want to know the structure, where are we going, what's the plan, for different reasons. 1s want to know just so they can like get going where they want to go, and 6s want to know for that security and reassurance and safety that like I'm holding that space for them. And so it's just very interesting. But a 4 does not want that.
Yes, correct.
They do not. They'll get frustrated and overwhelmed with you. And so I think like knowing what each type needs in therapy is just so essential. It's like the therapy process, and what like a great gift, because it gives you like a quick insight into that, where it's like you can learn that in the therapy process, and you can learn that as you get to know the client. But sometimes you can make some mistakes if you don't know the Enneagram type, right? Like I was talking about, like I think that there were times in the past before I used the Enneagram that I might have told some mates to be more assertive because I thought that that's what you're supposed to do. That was not helpful.
Yeah.
It actually probably caused more harm in their relationships. They needed to learn to step back and let other people be in the assertive position and relinquish control at times. So it's just a very interesting kind of dynamic around that as well. Anything that you would add? Liz, we're already getting close to the end. I cannot believe it. Anything else that you would want to add before we kind of move into what we're doing and what we do?
I don't think so. There's nothing that's like, burning thought or anything like that. I feel like we could probably sit and talk about this stuff forever. But yeah.
Well, I think, first off, like, thank you. There were quite a few of you that showed up today. It's great to see you. And, to start off the year, January 5th, today with our Sexy First Fridays. Just to let you know, like next month, Sam is still on maternity leave, but we actually have another special guest that's coming in that's also a local therapist here as well. Her name is Leslie Root. She's actually who introduced me to the Enneagram along with Brooke Schmidt. And Leslie is going to talk a little bit about how love addiction shows up around Enneagram type, because that's one of her areas of specialty.
And how great for Valentine's month.
That is.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that when I planned that one, but it is a great one around that as well. And then one of the things that like Rachel and I have been talking about and been kind of excited about is like we are looking to see if people in the Minneapolis area would be interested in sort of like Enneagram and coffee dates. Coffee dates in the morning where we get together as groups and sort of like talk about some of this stuff, like more of an informal gathering where you can like ask us questions and these types of things as well. So we're not really sure when we're going to do that or exactly what that will look like, or if it's going to be free or donation based or for a small fee. But like if there is interest for any of you that are in the Minneapolis area, it would be in the South Minneapolis area that it would be run. Just DM her or I if you're interested, and we can keep you posted if that is something that will be coming. And then I will see you next month for Sexy First Friday with Leslie. And then why don't you talk a little bit about what you do and kind of what you have going on right now?
Yeah. Well, a lot of what I'm doing right now is just therapy. I do offer, if people are interested in it, I do offer like typing sessions to help people who maybe are struggling with maybe new to the Enneagram or kind of go between a few different types and they're just not really sure. That's a service that I offer. And other than that, right now, I have a class I'm teaching coming up at my church and some things like that, but nothing else right now. Have thoughts and dreams for the future, but that's kind of where things are right now. People can find me at renovationcounseling.com. And yeah, would love to connect with anyone interested.
She's a little bit newer to Instagram, but she does have a page.
I don't know what I'm doing.
So
I don't know what I'm doing.
Yes. But you know, don't hesitate. I know for me, I love it when people kind of like DM and ask me questions, and then obviously if it was into the therapy type stuff, I like refer you out. But like, you know, I'm sure that Rachel's in a very similar position that you can like DM her.
Yes, you
and
can.
ask
I know how to do that.
I don't know how to do very much. She just started her Instagram page just a few months ago, right?
A few weeks ago.
A few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Okay, a few weeks ago. So you might notice there's not a whole lot of posts there yet, but there are things to come, and I know that she'll do beautiful things there too. Yeah. So
2024 is 2024 social media year.
Exactly,
yes.
Exactly. Well, I just want to say thank you. We were really happy to share with you all about Enneagram, relationships, and therapy, and we look forward to seeing you next month for Sexy First Friday. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Bye.
All right.
Okay.